Okay guys, in this video we're going to look at the taxes example from day 3 of VBA. So you'll need to download the VBA day 3 examples file and go to the tab that says taxes and then open the editor and make sure that you're on this workbook, which is where all of the subs are. And I'm going to scroll down to the one that says taxes. Okay, so what is it that we're trying to accomplish here? We have 4 employees, and for each employee we have their gross pay, their tax rate, and then from here we want to calculate the dollar amount of their taxes and then what their net pay should be. So basically, after taxes, what their resulting pay is. So to answer the obvious question, yes, you could do this using Excel functions, but we're going to use VBA. It gives you a nice introduction into loops in VBA, which again I mentioned there's a lot of stuff you can do using Excel functions, but there are some things that you can't do that you need VBA for if you want to continue to work in Excel. So, so we're going to use VBA, not the Excel functions. So, looking at the problem, what we want to do is figure out kind of how to navigate the available data. So in other words, in order to calculate the tax amount, I know that I'm going to have to multiply each employee's gross pay by their tax rate. So something like this. So for the first one, I'm going to say, okay, well, I need to multiply 1,000 by 10%, and then I'm going to put the result in here. And then I'm going to move down here and do it for the next one. So 2,000 times 15%, put the result there, and so on. And so what you can kind of start to see is you're going to be, the term we're going to use is iterating. So we're going to iterate over the rows. So we're going to need a way to kind of mark where we're at currently so that we can say, well, I want to use these 2 cells from this row to calculate the tax amount and the net pay, and then move along. So in order to do this, we're going to use a DoUntil loop. So we want to move the cursor basically all the way through each of these employees and stop when there's an empty cell. So we're going to assume that we know this is it. We're going to stop once we hit this empty cell. So let's set up the loop first, and then we'll come back to the different variables that we need. So the loop that we're going to use mostly in this class is the DoUntil loop. So we start by writing DoUntil, and then we're going to write the following condition. So DoUntil is empty. So this is going to check for us whatever's inside the parentheses if it's empty. So is empty. We want to check the value of the active cell. So we're going to use ActiveCell.value. Make sure you close your parentheses correctly. So basically we're going to try to move the cursor along, and we haven't coded that part yet, but we're going to move the cursor along until we hit a cell that's empty, so that active cell has nothing in it. And we're going to keep running until that happens. So before I forget, let's end the loop by writing the word loop. And yeah, so that's basically our loop skeleton. Now we're going to set up some variables. Now the thing about programming is there's multiple ways of solving the same problem, but I'm going to show you the way that I like to demonstrate it, basically how to do this. So I'm going to make a variable to hold the gross pay, a variable for the tax rate, and then also variables for the tax amount and the net pay. So anything of interest. So gross pay, tax rate, tax amount, and net pay. I'm going to have variables for all four. So let's do that. So dim, let's just call it gross, and that'll be as currency. The next one, dim rate. The tax rate is %, so we want a single. And then the amount and the net pay are both going to be currency. So dim amount as currency. Finally, dim, let's just call it net as currency. Okay, fine. So we have variables to represent all four of the values that we're concerned with. Now, the next thing that we went over in class that I'm going to do here is make variables that track the output row and the output column. So in other words, when I'm pushing my value for amount and net back out to the Excel sheet, I need to know the row and the column position. So I'm not going to use range. So like I'm not going to say, oh, it needs to go in D3. I'm going to say, well, it's going to go in row 3, column 1, 2, 3, 4. So we use numbers for that. So it's going to go in row 3, column 4. So knowing that, that's where I'm going to assign these two variables. So let's set them up. So dim row as it's an integer. So it's an integer that tells us where the output row should be. And then dim call as integer as well. Okay. So like I said, I'm pointing out where the output is starting, the output row and the output column. So I want the first value that I output to go here. So in row 3, column 4. So we're going to set row equals 3 and col equals 4 in order to make that happen. So basically what I've set up is a way to collect all 4 items of interest, and then I've also said, well, here's where my output's going to start. Row 3, column 4. The last thing I need to do before I run the loop is tell it where the active cell should be to start. Okay, because if it starts in the wrong spot, like if it starts here, it's going to go down and then, oh, it'll be done. So it'll only do this one row, it won't do the whole thing. So we want it to start here. We wanted to start cell B3 so that it is on the gross pay for the first employee. So in order to do that, we're going to say range B3 dot select. So we're just indicating that we want the cursor to start there. I don't advise running this yet because we haven't put in a termination condition for the loop, and you will just have it be running infinitely. So we don't want that. So let's pause just for a second and take a look. We have our variables set up. We have our output variables set up, row column. We've set them to the right spot, and we have selected our starting position. So double check your code to make sure it looks like mine, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the loop. So I like to make sure that my loop will actually terminate. So the first thing I want to do is get that logic in there. So in other words, what do I have to do in the loop to get it to actually stop and not just keep running forever? So since the condition is that the ActiveCell value is empty, I basically want it to stop here. And I want to code this motion that I'm doing. So the motion that I'm doing is I'm moving the cursor down 1 each time that the loop runs. Now in order to represent this, what I can say is I can use offset and the current active cell to select the next active cell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ActiveCell dot offset, and then I want to select the offset to be the next row down. So since this row column, that will be 1 down, 0 across, and then finally punctuate it with dot select. So what this is going to do is from the current active cell, it's going to go and select the offset from that cell down 1 row. So in each time the loop runs, it's going to do that until it hits the empty cell. So at this point, if you want to run it, you can. So I'm going to hit the play button. And notice that when it stops, the position of the cursor is actually where we thought it was going to be. So it stopped when it reached an empty cell. Okay, so I'm going to space that down. Because basically now I know the loop it's working. The cursor is doing what I want it to do. So now that it's kind of hitting every employee and moving down each time, I can think about what I want to do while I'm on a particular row. So if we think about the first case, I'm sitting here, this is where the cursor starts, on the first employee at the gross pay. So what I'm going to do is first assign values to my input variables. Okay, so I'm going to say gross is equal to the ActiveCell.value. So it's the ActiveCell.value is 1000. That's where it's at when it starts. And let's set the gross pay to that. The tax rate is going to equal, now I'm going to use the active cell each time. So basically the rate's going to equal the active cell but offset by 1 column. So this is going to be ActiveCell.offset 0 rows and 1 column dot value. So this will actually take the value from the cell next door. Okay. Now the amount and the net pay I'm going to calculate using these 2 variables. I can't get it from the sheet, so let's do that. So amount is equal to the gross pay times the tax rate, and the net pay is equal to the gross amount minus the tax amount or amount. And at this point, I now have the values that I want. I just need to actually put them in the sheet. So in order to do that, we're going to use the cells notation. So we'll do the following. So instead of using a range, we'll say cells, and this is where the row and the column come into play. So we want to push it out to cells row column. So cells row column dot value, and right now this is representative of cells 3, 4, which is exactly where we want it to be. And we're going to set that to the amount. And then to follow up, so that's going to plop that right here. And then to get the net pay in there, we're going to do the same thing, but a little bit different. So cells row, and then instead of the column, we're going to use column plus 1. Okay, so we want it to be in not column 4, but in column 5. So we're going to do row, comma, column plus 1 dot value equals net. Now, if we run it at this point, we'll notice that we still have one little issue. So I run it, and actually if you notice what happened, all of the values get set here, okay, in row 3. And that's because the last thing that we need to do is each time we run the loop, when we're done, we have to increase the row by 1. So let's do that. So row equals row plus 1. And now each time the loop runs, it will, let me run it. It will start here, it'll use cells values to push the output here, and then it'll move down, down, down until there's nothing left. So we're going to be practicing these in class quite a bit, and I would definitely suggest taking a look at this for your homework assignment, the second problem, because it's very, very similar. So if you have questions about it, just let me know.